All right, welcome to the deep dive, where we like to, well, dive deep, really unpack stuff that you're curious about. And for this deep dive, we're looking at something you flagged for us. It's the impact of Brexit uncertainty, all that
Yeah.
back and forth, on the UK's services exports.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
It is. We've got your document right here. And we've also pulled up a really interesting academic paper. Um, let's see, it's called How Did the Brexit Uncertainty Impact Services Exports of UK Firms? Catchy, right?
Straight to the point. I like it.
Yeah. So what we're trying to do is cut through all the complexities and figure out how all that uncertainty around the UK leaving the EU really affected its services sector. I mean, you probably already know this, but that sector is a huge part of the UK economy.
It is. It's massive. And you've got to remember, right, the UK had this 44-year partnership with the EU. So the 2016 referendum, well, that kind of threw a wrench in things. It really started to reshape those trade relationships that had been built up over decades.
Yeah, absolutely. And, when you think about Brexit, a lot of the talk focuses on goods, right?
Yeah.
Cars, food, all that. But the impact on services, it hasn't gotten nearly as much attention.
You're right. It's almost like a blind spot in the whole discussion.
Which is kind of crazy when you think about it. Services make up like, what, two-thirds of the UK economy?
About that.
And then a third of its exports, too. And get this, as of 2024, the UK was the second biggest exporter of services globally.
Wow, second only to the US.
Only the US. So you'd think it'd be a bigger part of the conversation. Now, there are some people who say all that uncertainty between 2016 and 2020, when things are up in the air, they say it didn't really have a huge impact. Their argument is that big policy changes didn't happen right away. And sectors like digital and finance, they kept growing. The Economist even had an article, I think it was back in May 2023, making that case.
Interesting. Yeah, there's definitely a debate there. But, most of the research actually suggests that Brexit uncertainty had a much bigger impact on services specifically. Because leaving the EU's single market and customs union, well, that meant losing some really important things, like having the same regulations across the board and the free movement of people. And those things are essential for a lot of service industries.
Makes sense.
There was a study by Ahmad and some colleagues in 2023, and then others by Douche and Edwards in 2021, Dew and Shipatilo in 2024, and also Kren and Lawless that same year. All of them point to a pretty significant negative impact.
Okay, so it's not just like, I don't know, hotels and restaurants we're talking about here.
Right.
You've got what's called the servitization of manufacturing,
Oh, yeah.
meaning even companies that make physical things are relying more and more on services.
Exactly.
And the UK is a major hub for, what do they call M&Es?
Multinational enterprise.
Right, multinational enterprises.
Yeah.
And they use the UK as a base for selling services into the EU.
It's a springboard right into that massive market.
Exactly. And apparently, foreign-owned businesses are responsible for over half of the UK's service exports, at least if you don't count finance, insurance, and transport. That's according to Lowe's 2021 research.
Wow, that's a big chunk.
It is. And here's the thing about M&Es. They're really sensitive to uncertainty.
They are because they operate across borders, right? So they can move their operations around pretty easily if things get shaky.
Compared to businesses that are just focused on the UK, you mean?
Right. And we've already seen some companies relocating to places like Ireland and the Netherlands because they want that smooth access to the EU market.
Makes sense. So let's talk about this whole uncertainty thing. It wasn't just a quick blip, was it? This went on for years.
No, it was a long haul, about 4.5 years, from the referendum in June 2016 to the actual withdrawal in January 2021.
So what were the main things driving all this uncertainty? Why were people so unsure about the future?
Well, there were a few key factors at play. First, there was this fundamental ambiguity about when and how the UK would actually leave.
Like the mechanics of it all.
Exactly. Article 50, that's the formal process for leaving, it was invoked in March of 2017. But then everything just got bogged down in these really long political debates and extensions to the deadlines. So businesses were basically left in the dark for ages. They couldn't plan properly because they didn't know what the future held.
Yeah, that's got to be tough. It's like trying to, I don't know, build a house without knowing what the blueprints are.
Exactly. And then on top of that, the details of the post-Brexit trade agreement, that was all up in the air for a long time, too. Things like customs arrangements, the regulatory environment, whether there would be tariffs or other trade barriers with the EU, none of that was settled for a long time. And service firms, they really need clarity on those things to make big decisions about investments and the future.
Yeah, it's risky to put money down when you don't know what the rules are going to be.
Right. And it wasn't just the negotiations with the EU that were causing uncertainty. The domestic political situation in the UK itself was a factor too.
Oh, right, all the internal stuff.
Yeah, there were changes in leadership, big divisions within the political parties, and tons of arguments in parliament. It just created this sense that things were unstable, that the ground was shifting. Businesses weren't sure which way the UK was headed in terms of its economic and trade policies. So a lot of them just kind of held back, waiting to see what would happen before making any big moves.
Right, the classic wait-and-see approach.
Exactly. And then you have to factor in the global situation at the time. It wasn't exactly smooth sailing internationally either.
Things were heating up in other places, too.
Definitely. There was a rise in protectionist sentiment globally, and the trade tensions between the US and China were escalating. So all of that added another layer of complexity and uncertainty for UK businesses trying to navigate the Brexit situation. It was like trying to solve a puzzle while the pieces kept changing shape.
So how did all this uncertainty actually show up in the real world? Were there any indicators that measured this, this feeling of unease?
Yeah, there were actually. There's something called the Economic Policy Uncertainty Index.
EPU.
Right, EPU. And in the UK, that index spiked right after the referendum. It stayed higher than the global average for quite a while, and it moved pretty much in sync with something called the Brexit Policy Uncertainty Index. You can actually see this pretty clearly in Figure 4 of the paper. Basically, it shows just how worried people were about the future of the UK economy. And the services sector, which relies so heavily on stable international relations, well, they were feeling it even more.
So let's talk specifically about services. I mean, we all know trading services is different from trading goods, right?
Yeah, for sure.
What are some of those key differences that made the sector so vulnerable to this whole Brexit uncertainty thing?
Well, a lot of services, they're not tangible. You can't just, box them up and ship them off like you can with a car or a washing machine.
Right, it's not like exporting a sweater or something.
Exactly. They often involve real-time interaction between the person providing the service and the person receiving it. And a lot of times you actually need someone to be physically present for the service to happen. Think about tourism, right? Or a consultant flying out to meet a client. These are things that are much harder to do when there's uncertainty about travel rules and trade agreements.
It's more about the flow of knowledge and interaction.
Right. Broadly speaking, we can define services as anything that causes a change in a person or a good. So it's a really wide range from things like travel and transport to super modern stuff like finance, IT, professional services, research and development. And these services are more and more integrated into global value chains. They're part of how physical goods are made and sold all over the world.
It's all connected. There's this framework, right, for how services are traded internationally, something the WTO came up with.
Yes. It's called GETS, the General Agreement on Trade and Services. It basically outlines 4 main ways or modes for how services are delivered across borders. So mode 1, that's cross-border supply. Like if someone in the UK offers an online course to someone in the EU, or if they give remote legal advice or financial consulting.
Gotcha. So across borders, but no one's actually moving.
Right. Then there's mode 2, consumption abroad. That's when someone actually travels to another country to use a service. So tourism, education, healthcare, things like that. Mode 3 is commercial presence. Like when a company from one country sets up an office or a branch in another country to sell services there, think of a bank opening a branch in a different country.
So they're physically there.
Exactly. And then there's mode 4, presence of natural persons. That's when a person travels to another country temporarily to provide a service, like a consultant working on a project or a software engineer. There's even a less common mode 5, which is about services that are kind of embedded in goods, but we don't need to get into that right now.
I'm already overwhelmed.
I know, it's a lot. But the important thing is that Brexit made all of these modes more complicated, more uncertain for UK service providers.
Right, because things were so smooth before when the UK was in the EU.
Exactly. They had all these agreements that made it easy to trade services across borders. But once they left, it was like starting from scratch. Even before the final trade deal was done, some experts were predicting that UK-EU services trade could drop by as much as 16%.
Ouch. So can you give us some examples of how this played out in real life? Like how did Brexit uncertainty actually affect different types of services?
Oh, absolutely. Let's start with financial services. They're a great example. Before Brexit, UK financial firms had something called passporting rights. That basically meant if they were authorized in the UK, they could offer services across the whole EU without needing a separate license in each country. Super convenient.
Sounds like it.
But after Brexit, those passporting rights went away. So suddenly, UK firms wanting to do business in the EU had all these new compliance costs. They might even have to set up a physical presence in the EU, which is expensive and complicated. It just created a ton of uncertainty for the whole sector.
So not a good thing for London's financial district.
Not really, no. And it wasn't just finance. Professional services like law and accounting were hit too. Before Brexit, if you were a lawyer or an accountant qualified in the UK, you could pretty much work anywhere in the EU. Your qualifications were recognized across the board.
So Brexit basically made it harder for those professionals to work across borders.
Yeah. After Brexit, it became unclear whether those qualifications would still be valid in all EU countries. So British lawyers and accountants might have to meet different requirements in each country they want to work in, which adds a lot of uncertainty and hassle.
And what about digital services? They're a huge part of the economy now, right?
Massive.
Yeah.
And they were affected too. Before Brexit, data could flow freely between the UK and the EU. But after Brexit, new data protection rules like GDPR came into play. And that created a lot of uncertainty for UK firms that handle data from EU citizens. They had to figure out how to comply with these new rules, how to transfer data securely, and there was a lot of confusion about what was allowed and what wasn't.
So even the internet wasn't immune to Brexit drama.
Nope, not at all. And even something as basic as transport and logistics, moving goods and people around, that was affected too. Uncertainty about things like driver's licenses, customs checks, all that stuff. It made it harder and more expensive to move things between the UK and the EU.
So Brexit really touched pretty much every corner of the services sector.
It did. And to really understand the full impact, you have to look beyond just trade policy, the usual stuff about tariffs and quotas. That's where this concept of international business policy uncertainty comes in. It's called IBPU.
IBPU.
Yeah. It's basically a way of looking at all the different things that can make the business environment uncertain for companies that operate internationally.
So more than just tariffs and trade deals.
Exactly. It's about uncertainty in regulations, laws, political relationships, even the stability of government policies. All those things can make it hard for businesses to plan for the future.
And IBPU is especially relevant to Brexit because
Because Brexit created uncertainty in all those areas. It wasn't just about trade, it was about regulations changing, political relationships being redefined. The whole future of the UK's relationship with the EU was uncertain. And that made it really tough for UK businesses, especially those in services, to operate internationally.
So the paper goes on to look at how this IBPU, this uncertainty, actually impacted UK services trade.
It does.
And they have these 5 hypotheses. The first one is that Brexit uncertainty made UK firms less likely to export services. What's the logic behind that?
Well, it makes sense, right? If you're a business and you're not sure what the trading environment is going to be like in a few months or a year, you're probably going to hesitate before investing a lot of money in setting up export operations.
You want to wait and see how things shake out.
Right. The risk of running into trade barriers or regulatory hurdles, that can outweigh the potential benefits of exporting, at least until things become clearer.
And what did the study find? Did the data back up this idea?
It did. They looked at data from individual firms, and they found that after the Brexit referendum, the likelihood of a UK firm exporting services actually went down by 1.5 percentage points.
That's a pretty big drop.
It is,
Yeah.
statistically speaking. And they also found a 1.4 percentage point decrease in the number of new companies starting to export services. Plus, the number of firms that stopped exporting services altogether, that went up by 0.5 percentage point. So yeah, the data definitely suggests that Brexit uncertainty made UK firms less keen on exporting services.
Okay, that makes sense. The second hypothesis is about the intensity of service exports. Basically, whether companies that were already exporting started exporting less because of the uncertainty.
Right, so it's not just about who's exporting, but how much they're exporting.
And the idea there is,
The idea is that even if a company keeps exporting, this uncertainty can make them scale back their ambitions. They might be less likely to invest in expanding their services for foreign markets, or in marketing their services overseas, or in developing new services that are tailored to customers in other countries.
because they're playing it safe.
Yeah. And there's research showing that companies tend to prioritize their home market when things are uncertain. They cut back on foreign orders faster than domestic orders.
So what did the study find about the intensity of service exports?
Well, they found that the share of exports in UK firms' total sales went down by 0.718 percentage points,
Meaning,
meaning that even those companies that kept exporting services, they were exporting a smaller portion of their overall business compared to before the referendum. So the uncertainty had an impact on how much they were exporting, not just whether they were exporting or not.
gotcha. The third hypothesis is about small and medium-sized businesses,
Hmm,
SMEs.
right.
And it basically asks whether they were hit harder by Brexit uncertainty than larger companies.
Yeah, because, smaller businesses generally have fewer resources.
Mm.
They might not have the same financial cushion to weather a storm like this, and they might not be as well equipped to handle the extra costs and complexities that come with navigating an uncertain trading environment.
It's harder for them to adapt.
Exactly. Plus, they often don't have the same ability to diversify their markets, so they're more vulnerable if one market goes sour.
And as you mentioned earlier, you were particularly interested in the impact on smaller businesses.
Right, because they're such a vital part of the economy. So what did they find out about SMEs? The study found that, yeah, both small and medium-sized firms were significantly less likely to export services after Brexit compared to larger firms. And even those SMEs that did continue to export, they saw a much bigger drop in their export share compared to their bigger counterparts. So, yeah, it seems like Brexit uncertainty really did hit the smaller guys harder.
Okay, that's not surprising, but it's good to have the data to confirm it.
Mm-hmm.
The fourth hypothesis is kind of a specific one. It's about multinational companies that decided to relocate some of their operations because of Brexit.
Ah, yes, the ones that got spooked and moved some of their business elsewhere.
Exactly. What were they trying to find out about those companies?
They wanted to see if those M&Es, the ones that reduced their investment in the UK, maybe by moving some operations to EU countries, if they were more affected by Brexit uncertainty than M&Es that kept their UK presence intact. The idea is that M&Es already have to deal with a lot of costs and challenges in coordinating operations across different countries.
Yeah, just managing a global business is tough.
Right. And Brexit just added to that complexity, especially the uncertainty about the future of the UK-EU relationship. It could make investment decisions harder, disrupt access to funding and research and development, and even make it tougher to attract and retain skilled workers in the UK.
So if those MNEs were shifting their resources out of the UK, it would make sense that their service exports from the UK would go down too.
Exactly. And that's what they found. The companies that reduced their UK employment or assets and made bigger investments in other countries, especially within the EU, they saw a pretty big drop in both their likelihood of exporting services from the UK and in the percentage of their sales that came from UK exports. So it seems like relocating some operations in response to Brexit did have a negative impact on those companies' UK service exports.
Gotcha. So the last hypothesis, the fifth one, is the big picture one. It's about the overall impact of Brexit uncertainty on UK service exports as a whole. How did they even begin to measure that?
It's a tough one to measure, for sure. But they used a really clever technique called the synthetic control method. Basically, they created a kind of fake UK economy.
A fake UK.
Well, not a real one, obviously. But they used a bunch of other similar economies that weren't directly affected by Brexit, mostly other OECD countries. And they combined those economies using specific weights to create a sort of mirror image of the UK economy.
So like a control group in a science experiment.
Yeah, exactly. And then they compared the actual performance of UK service exports after the referendum to the performance of the synthetic UK. That way, they could get a better sense of what might have happened to UK service exports if Brexit hadn't happened. For their data, they used information from the OECD, WTO, the World Bank, and a few other sources, covering the period from 2009 to 2019. And it's worth noting that in 2019, right before the UK officially left the EU, they were still the second largest services exporter in the world. They exported $419 billion worth of services that year, though their global market share had been shrinking for a while.
So what did they find out from this synthetic UK experiment?
The results were pretty significant. They estimated that, on average, UK service exports were about 9.2% lower each year between 2016 and 2019 because of Brexit uncertainty. That's a loss of about 36.7 billion US dollars every year. And over that whole period, the cumulative loss was a whopping $146.8 billion. They also looked at quarterly data, which showed that UK service exports started lagging behind right after the referendum in the second quarter of 2016. And they did a bunch of statistical tests to make sure these results were robust, and they were. So yeah, it seems like Brexit uncertainty really did have a big negative impact on UK service exports overall.
So we got through a lot of data here, a lot of analysis. What does it all mean for policy? What lessons can we learn from this whole Brexit experience, especially when it comes to handling similar situations in the future?
Well, one of the biggest takeaways is that uncertainty itself can be a huge barrier to trade and investment. So governments need to be really mindful of that. They should strive to create clear, predictable, transparent rules and regulations so that businesses can make informed decisions and feel confident about investing, especially when it comes to international trade.
Yeah, no one wants to play roulette with their business.
Exactly. And the fact that we saw a lot of M&Es relocating some of their operations because of Brexit uncertainty, that tells us something too. It means governments need to work hard to reduce the perceived risks of doing business in their countries, making customs procedures easier, trying to align regulations with major trading partners when it makes sense, pursuing mutual recognition agreements for qualifications and standards. Those kinds of things can really help.
So make it easy to do business, reduce the red tape, and be reliable.
Exactly. And we can't ignore the overall economic impact of all this uncertainty. The losses were substantial. So it might be a good idea for governments to set up early warning systems, some way to detect when these kinds of big uncertainty shocks might be on the horizon, and to have robust risk assessment frameworks to help businesses prepare for those shocks.
Kind of like a weather forecast, but for economic uncertainty.
Yeah, sort of. And then there's the question of how to support businesses during those turbulent times. Targeted financial aid, tax breaks for exporters, things like that can help companies get through those rough patches and stay competitive internationally. Of course, these measures would have to comply with WTO rules, but we've seen countries like Ireland and France doing this kind of thing in response to Brexit.
Okay, so early warning systems, risk assessments, targeted support. What else do they recommend?
Well, they highlighted the importance of clear communication. Regulatory bodies need to be very upfront with businesses about any changes that are coming down the pike, whether it's new rules, changes in market access, anything that could affect their operations. And they also talked about the need for more support and guidance for businesses, helping them understand the new rules, navigate the complexities of trade agreements, even providing assistance with the costs of complying with new regulations.
So more hand-holding, more resources for businesses.
Exactly. And they emphasize the role of the business community itself. Businesses can do a lot to help themselves by developing better risk management tools and sharing best practices with each other. There's a lot of collective wisdom out there that can be tapped into. And then there are things governments can do preemptively, like streamlining visa processes for skilled workers so companies don't have to worry about labor shortages, or investing in infrastructure to avoid potential logistical bottlenecks.
Yeah, get ahead of the game.
Right. Investing in education and skills training is crucial too. A highly skilled workforce is more adaptable and resilient in the face of uncertainty.
Makes sense. And it's interesting that they also talk about how manufacturing and services are really intertwined.
Yeah, they are. A strong manufacturing sector needs a strong services sector, and vice versa. They rely on each other. So any trade policies or agreements, they need to consider both sectors together, not in isolation.
This is all part of the same ecosystem.
Exactly. And even though we have a trade deal between the UK and the EU now, the future of services trade is still, it's still evolving.
There's still a lot of unknowns.
Definitely. Things are still settling down. So it's important to keep an eye on how things develop and to adjust policies as needed to support the services sector.
So the big takeaway here is that the uncertainty created by Brexit, it really did have a negative impact on UK services exports in all sorts of ways, and it had real economic consequences.
Absolutely. It wasn't just some abstract concept. This uncertainty had a tangible impact on businesses, on jobs, on overall economy.
Now, for you, our listener, here's a final thought to chew on. In a world where everything is so interconnected, what are some of the other things, beyond the usual trade stuff, that could create similar shocks of uncertainty and disrupt international commerce in the future? Think about geopolitics, about how different countries are regulating things like data and technology, even about unexpected global events. What could throw a wrench in the gears of the global economy next? It's something to think about. And if you want to dig deeper into all this, be sure to check out the source material we've talked about today. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.